Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. I'm super excited to be back in Athens, Georgia, or actually Bogart, Georgia.
Bogart.
With Dr. Michael Dirr. I shot a video with him in the fall, and the audio was terrible, and I got a hydrangea book from him, and I didn't get him to sign it, and that was how that day went. It was spectacular other than those two things. So I'm back with my book to get it signed, and I'm excited to have Dr. Dirr talk plants with us again. So.
Welcome back. I'll hold the book. The book came out in 2021, a new hydrangea book, and I had written one back in 2004. And since that time, we've had well over 200 introductions in the United States, more hydrangeas, so I thought it was about time. Plus, with two partners, I own a breeding company, and we're constantly trying to upgrade hydrangeas so they're actually cold hardy and they flower every year. So we have many new ones mentioned in the book, and we're still working on the perfect hydrangea, which is a dream. And maybe one of these days we'll get there. But for viewers who might have seen this before, we welcome you back. It's the scars of winter pretty much have disappeared with the new foliage. And Bonnie and I have been in this garden. I mentioned a little bit about the time frame. We've been in the garden this is 13th growing season, and we do largely everything ourselves. A few big trees were planted, but otherwise mow the grass and on and on and on. We use a chainsaw. If you look at my arms, they look like they've been in battle. And you know, I'm always getting scratched, cut, whatever. But you know, it's all worth it. And this is one of the great exercises. I know Jim had a wrap up the last time. Talked a little bit about why gardening is important, but I could almost do it as kind of foreshadowing what's coming down the pike here. Is it definitely, as my colleague Armitage says, and I think he's going to be doing a video with Jim, it nourishes the soul, and I don't think there's any doubt about it. I feel great peace, and so does my wife, Bonnie, when we're out in the garden. We work together in it, and I tried to get her in the video today, but she said no way. And she handles a lot of the pruning, and as we walk around, you'll see we have very few geometric shapes in this garden. Everything is sort of free-flowing, which represents the genetics of the plant, and I think makes a big difference in how people see this garden versus if Jim drives you down the street and does a quick video shoot, you'll see meatball 1, meatball 2, meatball 3, meatball 4. You won't know the difference. They may all be different plants, but they're all meatballs.
Right. So you had the same experience up in Raleigh. We had this 23-degree night that shouldn't have really caused any harm, except for it was combined with this weird wind. And it seems like you have a few things stung as well.
The Japanese melon, we were 22 degrees here. And it was like March 12th, 13th, somewhere in that 13th, time frame. Yeah. And we covered, I'll maybe talk a little bit about Rime, which is a spun-bonded polyester, which we use to cover our hydrangeas in our business and also here. And the ones we covered were saved. If we get that far, we'll take a loop around the house, I'll show them to you. The ones we didn't cover got nailed. I mean, they were just brown to the stem.
Right.
So most things didn't get nailed. What got hurt more than I thought it would be the distiliums, which are relatively new broadleaf evergreens that were actually introduced down there. And the one behind me probably is injured. There's others. Some were not touched, and others weren't. So in a way, it was kind of a blessing. There's something you can pull out of everything that's kind of goes sideways on you, and you find out that there are some cultivars that are actually completely cold tolerant, and others that you probably ought to throw in the garbage can and just discard and quit growing. So yeah, there was a learning experience.
So we're going to bounce around and take a look at some plants.
This is the traditional foundation planting, and I should say non-traditional in our case. My belief is that nothing should look totally uniform, and as you take a look in the front of the home here, that's pretty much the case. I like self-seeded plants, and I love columbines. My wife does too. And these typically when the seeds mature, which is usually in June, I'll collect them and just scatter them about. And you know, they some germinate, some don't, but they're beautiful. And what's amazing about columbines, Aquilegia, is the variation in color. And you can look, there's pink here, there's blue here, and there's a kind of I'm not sure, sort of a wine color. And you know, they're good for maybe 2 to 4 weeks, and then they sort of disappear, which is fine because other things pop up. The other thing, I try to thread things together, and I shouldn't use the word try or we try to thread things together so there's some commonality as it pulls your eye down. But the Japanese maple that you're looking at here is one called Ryusen. This came back from Japan. It's a weeper. And one of my wife's very favorites. The fall color on this doesn't get too big, number one. So you're looking at something probably 6 to 10 feet. It can be easily kept at that height. And fall color is sort of a yellow-orange, maybe a little tinge of bronze in there. And absolutely beautiful. And even in winter, it has a character to it, a texture to it. So there's so many Japanese maples, from little miniatures to 20-foot trees, and I've pretty much got them all. I probably got about 30, 40, 50 Japanese maples in the garden scattered about. And as we walk down the path, this is one that has a bit of variegation in it, and some of these are so subtle, the variegation pattern, for example, that you literally have to get up close to see it. You can see the green veins and the yellowish interveinal areas. This is Shiga. This is a tough one to memorize. It's called Shigatatsu Sana. And if you ask me what that translates to, I couldn't tell you, except maybe it translates to variegated leaf. But again, a small, very, very pretty, elegant, and Japanese maple, and the foliage will eventually go green. As we move down, another Japanese maples, someone is going to say probably too many Japanese maples. This is one called Rare Flora, which is extremely thread-like. You can see it when you take a look at the film that, it's almost fine filigree type, one of the finest I've had. And I started off with, all these were like little 3-gallon plants when I bought them. And this has been one of the slowest growing Japanese maples that we've ever had in the garden. But it's beautiful and it's elegant. And when you walk down, you really don't, unfortunately, maybe in a way, you don't even see the house. You're kind of looking at the variation in the various plants. And I got a pretty good mix of broadleaf evergreens in here that in the wintertime, there is something to kind of soften it and green it up a bit. And moving down the walk with our favorite cat. This is an Acer japonicum type called Green Dragon, and again, it is a dissected type, very, very beautiful filigree type foliage, and again, a good orange-red fall color on this. So I shouldn't say again, but orange-red fall color. And behind it is probably, I think Don Shadow always told me this was the best Acer palmatum dissectum, Tomukiyama, and I think he's absolutely right. I've got several of them in the garden. It'll eventually go green, but when it comes out, it's absolutely beautiful. And the best thing about it, it grows. You don't have to do a lot to it. You plant it, you watch it, you occasionally prune out a dead branch, and you're off and running. So right there, we've looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Japanese maples that I think anybody that wanted to add 1 or 2 to the garden could succeed with, and none of them are too big. I think that's a big asset. And again, there's more as we move around. I'll show you a couple others as we move around the garden too. This is kind of a hodgepodge bed I have out in front of the house, and we built a little wall, or had a wall built around it to give it a little sort of architecture. But you're looking at an iris called Iris tectorum, or the Japanese roof iris. And I read what Tony Event said about it. I don't think it's even native to Japan. I think it's native to China. And Tony does market a variegated form of this, which is beautiful. But this is the alba form, and also have the purple form. And what's remarkable, full sun, and right now I'm standing, and Steffi and I are standing under a willow oak, and I'd say heavy shade, or at least half shade here, year-round. Not year-round, certainly not in wintertime, but it looks good. It's almost semi-evergreen in the winter months. Pops out in typically late March. The new shoots start coming up, and obviously we're heading to mid to late April, and it's in flower here. And one of the nifty things about it is that, Stephanie can get over here, it's probably the easiest thing to propagate in the free world. I just dug up clumps of this, and you can see my process here. It's easy to pull. It's very much surface rooted, but it's drought tolerant, which is further amazing. And I will divide these up. I don't have my pruners with me, but I can divide. You can see me breaking the fans apart. I'll divide, in fact, I'll break one here. I think I can pull one apart. And I'll cut the leaves in half, and it goes into a 1-gallon container with our standard bark mix and fertilizer. And in 2 months, I got a new plant. I have a plant that fills a complete container, the container fully, and ready to go to market or ready to go back in your garden. And we just pulled up 1, 2, 3, and we may get 4 out of this if we're careful. No, we may get 5 out of it. We got 5 out of this. And I'm going to donate this to, I don't know if you have these in your garden, Jim, but
I'll take them.
Okay, but Jim's got 5 now. He has 5 Iris tectorum. So how can you beat an iris that doesn't get borers, doesn't get stressed, grows in shade, grows in sun, doesn't need a whole lot of water, and delivers on the promise for about 2 to 4 weeks every year with either white flowers or blue flowers. Tony's got one that he offers, which is called Ikeda Sunbeam. I have trouble pronouncing that. I-K-E-D-A Sunbeam. And it's a variegated form with white edges. It's absolutely beautiful. In fact, it would look pretty under here, and with the purple flowers of the typical species. So that's a mini lesson in iris. And I'm not much of an iris person. The tall bearded iris, I don't really get too excited about them. But this works as a ground cover, an inexpensive ground cover, And when you got something that doubles for sun or shade, you have a plant that's probably worth considering. I've looked at hardiness ratings. They listed as zone 5. Obviously, we're in zone 8, so it has a wide adaptability range also. This is Cornus Cusa, and I love dogwood, Cornus in general. And the issue is with Cornus flora, our native dogwood, there's always a problem with canker or borers or stress. And I've bought as many as 10, 20 from Tennessee nurseries, which are nice plants when they came in, and I think I probably got 1 or 2 left in this garden. I just can't seem to keep them alive. We'll probably take a look at this a little later on in the walk through the garden. There is a series called the Appalachian series, which I'll talk about, which has been fairly resistant and has held up well. It's held up for like 13 years in this garden. But this is Cornus Cusa greensleeves, which flowers after Cornus florida. And it's been productive every year. I mean, you can see the quantity of bracts on this thing, the pointed bracts versus the indented bracts of Cornus florida. And it's been a slow growing tree, but it's a wonderful addition, and it kind of extends the gardening season into, or I should say the dogwood season and the gardening season, into May for color. And these bracts will go from this, what would you call that, light limey green or whatever, to a glistening white. And so you really get multiple weeks color out of this, probably a month or more, and sometimes the bracts will actually age to a pink coloration. So a lot to be said for Cornus Cusa, not very common in garden centers. Cornus florida dominates, but I think there's something to be said for this and for the hybrids that Dr. Wharton from Rutgers introduced, which are Cusa florida crosses. And we'll again look at one called Aurora a little later on that's held up well in the garden too. This is Acer palmatum seryu, and this is a toughie to spell. It's S-E-I-R-Y-U, and I don't know the history on it, but it's one of the very few, maybe the only dissected leaf tree types. And for years and years and years, I've tried to get a red foliage form like this. And this year I germinated, I have almost 200 seedlings that I germinated, and every one looks like this. I didn't get a single. I thought it might cross with some of the red leaf types I have in the garden. But what's really remarkable about this is its tenacity. I think it's one of the best Japanese maples for full sun, shade. And we've probably got 10 or 15 around the garden here. And I've never lost one. And if you're looking for a reliable tree with fall color that'll grade from literally kind of reddish purple to red, Seryu, Acer palmatum seryu is one of the best. Height-wise, I've never seen anything bigger than about 15 to 18 feet. I'm sure they, if they're older trees, it could be. But if you take a look where the seeds are just forming up here, you can see the samara is just forming. And I give you a little hint on that if you're interested in germinating a Japanese maple seed. I collect them in fall when they're brown. I actually put them in a flat, and I take a big plastic tub and I stick them outside and let them go through the natural up and down of warm and cold, etc. And I check them every, say, month for moisture if they need to be watered a little bit. And they'll pop up in spring, which they did this year for me, to the tune of about 200. So it's kind of fun to take a look at your garden as a source of new plants. And it's also, I think, fun to do it and rewarding too at the same time. And you can share plants with your neighbors. So Acer palmatum seryu, one of the best tree type dissected maples. This is the second lot that we purchased back many, many years ago. This is probably a 10-year-old planting you're looking at. And as many of you know, or probably know, I wrote a book on viburnums, and I love viburnums. Unfortunately, the general public doesn't know enough about viburnums, so it's hydrangeas and roses and abelias rather than viburnums. But you're looking at a mixed bag of, there's trees in here, there's redbuds in here, there's herbaceous plants, and I've literally covered, if you walk under the big oak trees, we have an overstory, a mid-story, and a lower story. And it makes for, I think, a beautiful full planting. It also serves as screening without just putting a straight line of some kind of a hedge plant together. And you're looking at, right now, a viburnum called Utile, U-T-I-L-E, Service, S-E-R-V-I-C-E, viburnum. They're typically not fragrant, but it's evergreen, and it's pink-budded, white-flowered, and it takes the shade, it takes full sun. So very, very adaptable viburnum. It's been used in a lot of breeding. Many breeders have used it. Don Egoff from the National Arboretum. Viburnum brookwoodii is one of the hybrids with Carlesii and Bichuense. So it's an excellent breeding line. As we walk along here, they'll see a redbud overhead. This is forest pansy above. This is one of my favorite plants, which I think was in the last video. We talked about it in fall color. This is the Lindera angustifolia. And the new foliage is this sheeny yellow-green, just beautiful yellow-green. And this is a female, and there's unfortunately tons of fruits, and people will say it's invasive. Well, in my entire career, I've been able to germinate 1 or 2 seedlings from Lindera angustifolia. Flowers are yellow, not fragrant. Foliage holds all through the winter. We got another one in the back, but typically in November turns this magnificent yellow-orange fall color into red tones, so on and on. Above me is Viburnum macrocephalum. It's a Chinese snowball viburnum, which is probably the biggest selling and most common viburnum in Athens, Georgia area. You'll see it in many, many gardens. And the flowers first emerge, they come out lime green, they open to white, then they fall off. It's sterile. There's no fruits formed on it. And unfortunately, it gets immense. And for many, many years, we've used the species to try to get a small snowball that would look a bit like a hydrangea, but never been able to get there. I know some other breeders have tried the same thing. Right below that, you know, we could spend all day in this so-called viburnum area because there's probably about 80 plants mixed in and behind what you're looking at now. This is a Fothergilla called Blue Shadow. It's a branch sport of Mount Airy, intermediate Mount Airy, which is one of our introductions. And beautiful, when the foliage fully matures, it'll turn a blue. It's a powdery blue wax that's deposited on the foliage. I just love this, and this is a beacon when you drive down the street. The viburnums are finished, and this Fothergilla jumps out not because of flower, but because of foliage. And at the feet of the viburnum, we were talking about overstory, mid-story, lower story. I plugged in, and this was about 3 years ago, I plugged in a single shoot, several shoots, a polygonatum, I think it's called biflorum variegatum. It's a variegated Solomon seal. And this is one of the toughest, most reliable herbaceous perennials, and I'm not a perennial guy. Armitage can tell you the merits of this, but it's pretty much unkillable. Sun and shade, preferably shade. And as we keep moving down the pathway here, this is next viburnum is one of our introductions. When I say our, the University of Georgia introductions, it's called Spring Lace. It's an open pollinated seedling of Nantucket. It's fragrant. It's a little later than Nantucket. In fact, there's a Nantucket just a little bit further inside, and it's out of flower now. But I just love this plant. It's evergreen to semi-evergreen, depending on the temperature. It was evergreen this year, even with that 22 degrees we had in March. And the flowers are fragrant. It does not set viable fruit, so it's not going to seed in or anything. And the name is Spring Lace, and it's offered in the first editions brand by Bailey Nursery. And I just love this. I got a couple of these around the garden. We'll see another one as we walk through. But by picking the viburnums, they start flowering typically in March, which is Carlesii, Juddii, Carlcephalum, and you can bring them right through until now it's Viburnum rufigelum and Otago, and you're looking at obviously Spring Lace and Chinese Snowball to my left. We're still moving down the pathway. This is one of Denny Werner's Redbuds. Denny's the great Cereus breeder, obviously much more than Cereus, Budley and other plants, from North Carolina State University up in Raleigh. And Denny and I have been friends for a long time. I have great respect for him. He's been breeding Redbuds for over 20 years. And as Denny would tell you, not much happened for 15. And now we've got an avalanche of cultivars. It's overwhelming how beautiful they are. And then he figured out that Redbuds flower for us, they flower in mid-March to excuse me, the end of March, and they're gone. And then you're looking at green leaves. So then he went to work at the breeder's bench and came up with various variegated forms. And this is a weeper, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's late to leaf, it's hardy, and people think it's dead, but if finally the leaves start popping out, you can see them popping out right now. But it's a nice textural change from the, the everyday, you know, just old green redbud.
And that was called Ruby Falls.
Ruby Falls, yes.
Yeah.
If you look back in the back further in the border, you'll see these white fluffy clouds of petals, and that's Chionanthus retusus. That's or the American or fringe tree or Grancy graybeard, and I just love that plant. Again, later to flower, extends the gardening season. Native, it's dioecious species, meaning that male and female flowers on separate plants. And if it's a female, and I don't remember whether those had fruits on them, they have little blue, maybe half-inch 3/8 to ½ inch long sort of ovoid fruits on them, and the birds absolutely love them. But I never see enough of this offered in everyday garden center life, and I would like to be able to walk into Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever it might be, Walmart, independent garden center, and see, you know, a lineup of Cainanthus virginicus.
You know, the thing about that too is in that part shade and that understory, it seems to really be in full flower. And I see some people putting them out in really open spaces, and they seem to struggle a bit more.
Yeah,
the thing really likes to be in that understory.
It's extremely healthy in there. I don't know if that's the only reason. I've got them scattered around. But most of mine are in shade and have done well. Yeah. I've got some that are just leafing out now, so it's very variable in terms of leaf out times. Right. And I think this is one of our native plants. People talk about native plants all the time. This is one of the great native plants that I won't say very few people know, but it isn't very commonly available.
Right. All right, so here's one of the Distilleums, and this one was obviously in open air for that night back in March, and it got burned, you know, fairly significantly, but not terrible. It's just going to flush right back out, right? I mean, this is a lot of people asking me questions about this. This is, I mean, mine have already started to put on some new growth.
Yeah, there's a couple things you can do. One, you can shear them back. I've seen some people do that already into the older growth. And if you look at the mature leaves further back, they're okay. Yeah. What happened, the young leaves of this were out early. They're out like a lower pedalum. They leaf out early. Right. And they're much more susceptible to cold. And Jim said we got a pretty good battery with wind and cold. 22 degrees really did a number. But there's great, I think I mentioned this before, there's great variation in the amount of damage. Some had absolutely none, which is amazing, and others were, I won't say devastated, but people don't want to see brown broadleaf evergreens. That's a contradiction in terms.
But for a plant breeder, you're out here going, oh, that one didn't get damaged. I'm using that one.
Hey, listen, my ears went up like they had 10 one night. Walking around there, and you go, I can't believe it. Everything else is damaged, and here's a couple that weren't touched.
Right, so a plant breeder's dream, to have half of them die and to figure out which ones can overcome.
Mother Nature is good to us. Mother Nature is a selector for us. We go, all these years we think we got the perfect plant, then all of a sudden, kaboom, like you were talking about before with insects and diseases. Something hits it and you go, kind of disappointing. But there's always hope, and the hope was that there have been a lot of introductions, and nobody's ever had the chance to kind of compare them with a cold spell like we had. Right. And this brought it to the fore, and now we got some that are definitely better. They will be better. They will be produced. So nice. Distilleums have become a household, at least on 7 to 9. It's almost frightening. They're
we were up in Washington Square Park in New York City. You know, it's full of Distilleum.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was just wild to see. It made it to Manhattan.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure I'd be planting them in New York, but certainly this part of the world, there's you go to a nursery and there's blocks and blocks and blocks, as you know from your work with PDSI. Yeah. And they got, what do they got? They got a couple new ones out. What is it? Cast in Bronze.
And Jewel Box. Jewel Box is a great one.
And nobody knew the word. Distilleum back in 2004-05 when we started working on this at the University of Georgia. Now everybody's jumped on the bandwagon and has got their own brand. So this is the big leaf Magnolia macrophylla, and I grew these from seed, and I love seed. I think every seed is a gold mine. I've said this before, I think maybe in the last video. You never know what you're going to get, and I have a couple of these in the garden. This is actually third year from seed on this, so we're getting some growth. I got some that are bigger, but the foliage on macrophylla gets up to about 30 inches long. I'm not sure where this is going to fully end up, and I was feeling around for flower buds. You can tell whether you got flower buds, and on the 6 or 7 branches here, I have none this year, but the flowers are probably 10 inches, 12 inches across. They're fragrant, very fragrant, and they're often stained with a little sort of Merlot or wine color at their base. And it's one of the great natives, 30 to 40 feet tall. I collected this from a tree in Spring Grove Arboretum in Cincinnati that was easily 30, 40 feet tall and as wide. And when they're in fruit, too, they have these big, I call it a cucumber-like fruit. It's an aggregate of follicles that turn a rose red, and absolutely beautiful. And the bark is sort of smooth, elephantine, almost like elephant hide kind of bark. But try to find this in the average garden center. I'm not even sure mail order sometimes can deliver on the promise for such a tree. And there's another one called Magnolia ashii, which is often listed as a subspecies of this, which is smaller, and I've had that in the garden too. It doesn't get as big, and native to the panhandle of Florida. There's also Magnolia tripetala, which is another native, Magnolia pyramidata, and all those are big leaf types. But I find this is the easiest to grow. So if you want to start somewhere with a large leaf magnolia, this is the best choice, Magnolia macrophylla.
Thank you guys for watching part 1 of our visit with Dr. Dirr down in his garden in Bogart, Georgia. I'll have part 2 up very soon. As you can see, he is really a ball of energy out in the garden, and it's just an incredible encyclopedia of woody plants. So I look forward to putting up part 2. Thanks again.